Before this all happened, my brother was in and out of psych wards, in and out of jail, in and out of the hospital. He asked for help. He committed himself. Our families committed him. We asked for help. We didn't get help. No checkup. Let's try it. That's not how that should be.
On January 18, 2024, police responded to a home at the 1600 block of Avoca Street, Iowa, after a friend of 46-year-old Jennifer and Dazey reported that she had found her unresponsive body inside the house while visiting. The family dog was found deceased on the living room sofa from what appeared to be a significant injury to its head. When police arrived at the scene, they found Jennifer deceased on her bed with at least 2 of her fingers severed from her hand and lacerations to her face, neck, and head. At the scene, police arrested the suspect and Jennifer's son, 28-year-old Tyler James Dazey, who was located lying inside his room without any clothes on him. He was detained, but was not overly responsive to police and taken to an area hospital. In a letter to the court, Dazey, who was initially deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial before a judge ruled in May that he was now ready to face the charges against him, made religious statements as his argument for refusing to take part in the proceedings, which he equated to slavery. To be subject to slavery, through usury of the law, Dazey wrote, "I will not participate. I seek honor, to become of worth, I seek God. My mother would be ashamed otherwise, as is of my ancestors." The first witness was Christy Fallman, Jenny's neighbor and friend. She discovered her lifeless body in her bed when she came over to have morning coffee. But the amount of blood that I'd seen. I got terrified. While I was on the phone with 911, Fallman detailed how she collapsed to the floor and feared that whoever did this was still inside. She waited for officers to arrive before leaving the room.
You had opened the main door, but you were kind of in between. When you were there, tell me what you saw.
When I opened the main door to go in, I'd seen right here by the 2 pillars, Tyler standing there, naked. And so I hurried up and pulled the main door closed, but I stayed in between the screen door and the main door right here.
Right, so you saw him standing in there naked with his back to you. Tell me what you did in response to seeing that.
I rushed, shut the door, stood there, text Jenny, "Hey you," saying if she was in the home to meet me at the door. While I was doing that, I heard a door close, so I figured, oh, Tyler went into his bedroom. I can re-enter the home. So that's what I ended up doing.
Okay. Did Tyler say anything while he was there?
No, never.
Okay.
As I went to sit down, I looked to my left, and I seen what looked like hair, fur, something. So I ended up scooching over towards that and lifting the blanket to find out what was underneath it, and it was Echo.
Okay. Tell me what you did then.
I lifted his leg up and I dropped it, and then I uncovered him more and I looked at his eyes. His eyes were looked almost glued shut. And then I covered him back up and I stood there. At that point, I tried calling her. I might have texted her. Nothing. The house was so quiet. And when I seen her purse, I stopped and questioned myself. She never leaves without her purse. She never goes anywhere without her purse. So that made my gut start turning, and I just stood there longer trying to think, where am I going next? Her door was closed.
Okay.
So I gently knocked on it, opened the door, said, Jenny, come on. You never sleep in like this. Let's go. I'm here. Let's start our day. And no response. And I'm like, so I kept, come on, Jenny, let's go. Wake up. Still nothing.
Okay, so what did you do then?
I then, right here was like her bed, and then over here is a nightstand. I walked up to the corner of the nightstand and her bed, and I stood there and I looked over her, and then I froze.
Okay. Why'd you freeze?
The blood and the amount of blood that I had seen, I don't know if I was in shock or if I was my brain playing tricks on me, because the way her jaw was is the same way of one of her seizures.
So you called Ron, your boyfriend,
Yes.
and after that, what did you do?
After I spoke with him, I hung up the phone and I called 911.
When officers searched the rest of the home, they found Tyler Dazey. They woke him up and immediately placed him into handcuffs. Once he was cleared from hospital, the detectives conducted his interrogation. Here is everything Dazey talked about in his interrogation.
Did you also ask him when he last showered?
I did. I asked him about his bathing habits, and he advised that he used the shower in the main floor bathroom. He advised that he had taken one shower the evening before after he had a workout. He ballparked that to be around 8 p.m., and then he advised he had taken another shower just prior to police coming into his home that morning. And that is why he was naked.
Did you ask him if he owns a hatchet?
I did. Mr. Dazey acknowledged that he did own a hatchet. He advised me that he kept that hatchet in his toolbox within his bedroom, and he also noted that he had actually observed that hatchet that morning.
Did Mr. Dazey make any statements concerning his discipline and awareness of surroundings?
There were multiple times during the interview where he stressed how disciplined he was and how he was very aware of everything around him and what was happening.
Did you ask any questions about the layout of the house?
I did, and as soon as I asked that question, he said, "You were there." So he was obviously recognized I was in the room with him earlier that morning.
Did you ask him about his relationship with his mother?
I did. His response was, "It's fine, except for when she's acting sneaky like a witch." He then went on to talk about how his mother was part of a covenant of witches. I also asked, I followed that up with how he thought his mom thought of him. And his answer to that question was, "I think she hated me so much that she hated herself."
Did you ask when he last had a conversation with his mother?
Yes, he advised that was just before police came in and got him, and at the time she was practicing witchcraft.
Did he say where that conversation took place?
Yes, he stated that his mother was in her bed, again, noting that she was practicing witchcraft.
Did you ask about specific events that morning?
I did multiple times throughout the interview, early on when I tried to hone in on what he was doing in the minutes, the hours before police arrived. He would either say that he didn't remember or he would shift topic. Then toward the end of the interview, I again asked him what he could specifically recall happening before police got there. And he said that he was having a conversation in his head that he did not want to think about. This conversation was about trauma. He didn't want to think about it, and he would not expand on that when I asked him what that conversation was.
Did you ask him about his mom's witchcraft?
we went into that in a little more detail. He described her witchcraft as putting evil on him. He said just evil. I then asked him how he felt about his mother practicing witchcraft. And I think that is when he gets into stating something similar to, I just gave up. I just don't care. I don't need her to validate me. He then followed that comment up with, why would I care what a whore thinks? You sit around and drink yourself stupid, fuck like animals, and ruin your children's lives. Why would I care what a person like that thinks?
Did he say anything about you know how witches are?
Yeah, that was in reference to, I asked him if he had ever called his mother a whore to her face. And he said, yeah, I did. I asked how his mom responded to that, and he said, she's a witch. You know how witches are. Oh, I'm better than you. I will be your fear. I will be your enemy.
Did you ask him to explain his mother's traumatic injuries?
Yes, about an hour and 18 minutes into the interview, I got to the point where I wanted him to explain the significant and severe injuries that she had. And when I asked him how she got these traumatic injuries, his response was witchcraft. I then specified that I was referring to the physical injuries to her body. He again responded witchcraft. I then asked him, I was going to need a little better understanding of how witchcraft could cause such injuries. At that time, Mr. Dazey ended the interview.
Did you leave the recorder on when you left the interview room?
Yes, the recorder stayed on until we were all done executing the search warrant on Mr. Dazey's person. So at the conclusion of the interview, that's when I told him that we had to collect evidence from him, provided him a copy of the search warrant. Gorell and I then exited the room to gather up our gear for collection. After the fact, when I went back and watched the interview to type up my report, I noted that Mr. Dazey made some comments aloud while we were out of the room.
What did he say? What were the comments?
He stated, I would gladly spend an eternity in hell if she could just have a chance at heaven.
Was Mr. Dazey also alone in the squad car when you brought him to the port, when he was brought to the port down at the law enforcement center?
Yes, so Skorupski and I transported him from Mercy back down to the law enforcement center. Once we pulled into the Sally port, the two of us, I exited the squad car. In that process, I dropped my portable radio, the battery bounced off, and we were looking on the ground for my battery. Then we got him out. So he was in the squad car for over a minute before we pulled him out. After the fact, I went back and reviewed that footage from the squad car.
Did he say anything during that time he was in the squad car?
He did. Mr. Dazey made a couple comments during that time. He stated at first, they will never figure out the psychology. You have a choice, conquer me or hell it is. He then paused, stated, I love you, I'm tired, and that was the end of the comments.
Now, before Mr. Dazey was taken up to the jail floor after the interview, did he say anything spontaneously?
Yes, it was actually, he and I were just standing in the interview room together because we had collected the Tyvek suit as evidence. I was waiting for Gorell to return with some clothing. We weren't talking, I wasn't questioning him, and he just stated aloud, witchcraft, brother, witchcraft. A lot that is wrong with my life. When people are trying to get in your way, when you are just trying to pursue happiness.
Did you tell him he was being arrested before he was taken up to the jail floor?
I did. He actually asked me if he was getting showered in, referring to going up to the jail floor. It was at that time I told him he was being arrested for the murder of his mother. His response was, it's hard to argue witchcraft in court, isn't it?
During all of your interactions with Mr. Dazey, did he at any time ever deny harming his mother or the dog?
Not once.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. On direct examination, you talked a little bit about watching the traffic cameras related to Kylie Frey or Kylie Dazey.
Correct.
All right. Are there any traffic cameras on Avoca?
There are not.
And which traffic camera were you watching on the corner of 24th and Jackson?
There's a camera at 24th and Jackson directed to the north, which captures the block in which she lives in, or lived in at the time.
And does it show the front door of her residence?
It does not. Her door is on the south side of the residence, recessed away from.
Next witness was medical examiner, who gave a detailed insight of injuries sustained by Jennifer Dazey. Many of her injuries to her head was life-threatening.
So on pathologic diagnosis number 1, could you explain what that means?
So the first diagnosis is my cause of death. The cause of death in this case was multiple sharp force injuries. Underneath that 1, I have an A, a B, and a C, where I group sharp force injuries in terms of location on the body. There were 3 main locations that had sharp force injuries: the head, the neck, and the left hand.
So under A, does that separate out those injuries to the head?
Yes, A describes the injuries to the head. There were a total of 13 sharp force injuries. There were cutting wounds and chopping wounds to the head.
And then under B?
Under B, there were injuries to the neck, a total of 2 chopping wounds to the neck. And then C lists another 2 chopping wounds, this time to the left hand. For additional injuries, in addition to the sharp force injuries, there were blunt force injuries. So injuries due to the body coming into contact with something with a flat surface. There was a contusion or a bruise on the back of the left forearm and some bleeding under the scalp on the left side of the head. The skull, the dura, which is a thin layer of tissue that covers the brain, and then the brain itself. That topmost chopping wound, within that wound is silver metal. That's from the decedent's previous brain surgery. The chopping wound actually fragmented that surgical material. Both resulted in fractures not only of the bone that was directly underneath the skin, but they resulted in fractures of the base of the skull. The topmost chopping wound injured part of the skull that's near the left eye, and then the lower one injured part of the skull that's near the ear canal. There were 2 chopping wounds to the left side of the neck, one more toward the front and one more toward the back. Those injured the soft tissue of the neck and then bones of the upper cervical spine. I did not appreciate any injury to the spinal cord itself, and those had a maximum depth of 2 inches. This is the left hand again. So this is a chopping wound that injured 3 fingers. The index, the middle, and the ring fingers. The index finger has a pretty superficial wound by the fingernail. The middle finger was amputated as a result of the chopping wound, and the ring finger was nearly amputated as a result of the chopping wound. There's just some skin left that's connecting the finger to the hand. Injuries here included soft tissue and then bones of the fingers.
Specifically, can you identify any of those injuries that you believe were the fatal ones?
Really, you can die of any sort of sharp force injury or injury itself. In terms of the injuries that caused the most damage, especially damage to vital structures, those were the 2 chopping wounds on the left side of the head that injured the skull, the dura, the brain, and caused bleeding around the brain.
Thank you.
Since Jennifer was attacked with several tools, forensic analyst was also called in. Tyler tried to clean himself after the incident, so several DNA samples were not conclusive, but whatever DNA was examined inconclusively, it clearly indicated that Tyler Dazey was man responsible for it.
What is your present occupation?
I am a criminalist in the DNA section at the Iowa DCI Crime Lab in Ankeny, Iowa.
How long have you been there?
I've been in this position since October of 2007.
Thank you. So then you also looked at items 7 and 8.
Yes,
These were bloodstains from the dining room and from the hallway, is that correct?
that's what they're labeled as, yes.
What were your findings on those specimens?
For item 7, screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from dining room, and the DNA profile developed matched the known DNA profile of Jennifer Dazey, and the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 310 octillion.
So it's safe to say that the blood belonged to Jennifer Dazey.
Unless she has an identical twin.
And that would be the same for for number 8, 7 and 8 both?
Yes, screening also indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from hallway 4, and the DNA profile developed matched the known of Jennifer Dazey with the same statistic.
Okay, item number 9 was a swab from the bathroom sink. What were your findings on that?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from bathroom sink. The DNA profile developed indicated a mixture of 2 individuals, and due to the mixture complexity, no further interpretations can be made.
Could you explain a little bit about what the mixture and complexity mean as it pertains to DNA?
So when I said you get half your DNA from your mother and half your DNA from your father, so you have 1 or 2 alleles at each location. When you have multiple people, you will see 3 or 4 alleles at each location. When there's not enough difference in the contributors, so if they're about equal or if there's a very low amount, you'll be able to see that you have multiple people, but you won't be able to separate the 2 profiles out.
So in other words, there was DNA there was just a mix and you couldn't pull out any individual people, right?
Correct.
Okay, let's look at item number 10, the hatchet. What were your findings on that?
Screening did not indicate the presence of blood on 2 stains on the blade and head of the hatchet. Screening indicated the presence of blood on 3 areas on the handle of the hatchet.
Did you do that screening for blood or did someone else?
I did.
When you handled the hatchet, what condition was it in?
I'm not, it was.
Did it appear to have been cleaned or scrubbed or washed?
Not that was obvious, no.
Were there, cakes of mud or dirt or anything on it?
Not that I recall.
Did you find blood on the handle?
Yes.
What were your determinations on that?
Well, I took 1 sample at this time from 1 of the areas, and the DNA factors detected were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
And again, meaning to lay people?
There's some DNA on there, but there's not enough to determine a profile that is strong enough for comparison.
Okay. Item number 11, you took sample from the bathtub drain. What was your findings there?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from bathroom tub drain. The DNA profile developed indicated a mixture of 2 individuals. The profile of the major contributor was consistent with the known DNA profile of Tyler Dazey. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 130 septillion. The additional factors present were insufficient to determine the profile of the minor contributor.
Did you take swabs of the blade of that hatchet at some point?
Yes.
What did you find from that?
Screening did not indicate the presence of blood on the blade of the hatchet, and the DNA factors detected from swabs of the blade of the hatchet were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
Could that be that there may have been blood on there which had been scrubbed or wiped away and left some DNA but not enough to make a profile?
That's possible.
Did you find any actual blood on that weapon when you tested it?
The 3 areas that screened positive for the presence of blood.
But that wasn't visible to the naked eye, was it?
No, they were small and dilute stains.
Yeah, so you had to test for that just to pull it out of there? Would it be safe to say that this weapon had been cleaned of blood at some point, leaving only that little bit of residue behind?
That's outside my area of expertise.
Fair enough.
With this, the prosecution closed their evidence and judge then called upon defense to present their evidence. Even though the defense, whose past shows clear indication of mental issues, his counsel did not take the defense of insanity. Defense counsel suggested that the crime might have been committed by Kylie, who acted different during police interrogation.
Mr. Dazey making some statements that are strange, if nothing else. But what I'm going to ask you to do is keep an open mind. What I'm going to ask you to do is listen to all the evidence, okay? To things they didn't follow up on. Listen for the things that they can't provide evidence for, okay? For instance, I think you're going to hear testimony about this side door that's always locked. I think you're also going to hear testimony about who had the keys to that, and that there were 2 people who had the keys. One was Jennifer, and one was Kylie Frey. Okay. You're going to hear testimony that they can place Kylie. They can tell you where Kylie Frey was at 10 at night and 8 in the morning. I think you're also going to hear testimony about who had the keys to that, and that there were 2 people who had the keys. One was Jennifer, and one was Kylie Frey. Okay. You're going to hear testimony that they can place Kylie. They can tell you where Kylie Frey was at 10 at night and 8 in the morning, but they really can't tell you what happened in between those times. Because we know she was alive at 10 at night, okay? The evidence is going to show that. At 8:30, for sure that she was deceased, because that's when she was discovered, around that time.
Jury took only 2 hours for deliberation and found Tyler guilty of taking away life of his mother and her dog. Judge sentenced Tyler Dazey to the mandatory sentence of life in prison for first degree, along with a 2-year sentence for the charge of animal abuse. The charges will run consecutively. Dazey must also pay in restitution to his mother's estate.